Welcome to the Fellowship Podcast, a place where we have gospel conversations about loving God and transforming lives by following Jesus through life-on-life relationships. Thanks for tuning in. Well, Robby, welcome to the Fellowship Podcast. Thank you for being here. We're excited today to have Robby Partain, who's the Executive Director of the BBA, as we affectionately call it, or Bluebonnet Baptist Association. And we want to have a conversation just about supporting churches in our area, the challenges facing churches, challenges facing pastors in our area, and how you and your organization really help support churches. I know that's your calling. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became the executive director of BBA, and just God's journey in your life?
Well, I was born into being a Southern Baptist church kid, thanks to my mother, and so I've been a part of the church, and the church has nurtured my life since the cradle. When I was at early in my adulthood, when Susan and I went to college together, got married a month after we graduated, went back to the church where we were members in Houston. The pastor there was Dr. J.K. Minton, who is no stranger to this area, my predecessor at Bluebonnet Association. That's where the Lord really began working in my life. And I had the opportunity to serve as a deacon in that church as a young man in his early 20s. I had the opportunity to serve in student ministry, to serve in children's ministry. Got to be a part of the finance team for the church. Just a lot of experiences that I got to have because that church was willing to let young people be a part of those things. It was out of that experience that God called me into full-time ministry. I worked in secular business. I was an accounting major in college. I worked for an oil company, worked for a building materials company, and was out of that secular business career that God called me into vocational ministry. I got involved in church planting after I completed seminary, and the Lord moved us to Portland, Oregon. It was that church planting experience that then moved me to the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention as a church planting specialist for the state. So I got to be a part of starting, catalyzing churches throughout the state, and got to be a part of leading a team that did that. So it was while I was doing that in the aughts, from 2001 to 2008, that I got the opportunity to work with this association, Bluebonnet Baptist Association. Again, Dr. Minton, J.K. Minton, was the executive director of the association then, and he and I having had a long relationship. Has been and still is my mentor in ministry. We got to work together to help catalyze some churches being planted here in this area. Well, as he was moving toward retirement, the association asked me if I would consider coming on and
Does
being.
JK really retire?
Well, a retirement in quotes.
Okay.
Retirement meaning he went from one job to three. He's not real good at retiring, but he's also a model for me in keeping yourself healthy and fit so you can continue to serve the Lord in your 70s and now 80. Just had his 80th birthday.
Wow.
Not too long ago.
Happy birthday, JK.
Yeah, so keep yourself fit. Anyway. As he was announced his plans to retire at a certain point, the association called me to come be his associate for a year and a half with a planned transition at the point he retired. So it was through that planned transition starting in June of 2008 that went through the rest of 2008, all of 2009, and then January 1, 2010, I succeeded him as executive director of the association. We really just traded offices. We moved. I moved across the hall, and he moved across the hall, and he still works with us now, some 16-something years later, as a church health consultant.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much I'd love to unpack with that. I mean, I came out of a bivocational situation, having to learn how to deal with stuff in the real world. Well, I mean, I say real world, but I was in high school for 17 years teaching and coaching, but the things I learned there that I was able to bring into ministry were so what's something that you brought in from your business world and accounting that you brought into this job that you do today?
Well, one thing that's been really helpful, this is kind of practical, it's not particularly exciting, but very helpful, is that just, with an accounting background, I know how to read things like financial statements. I know how to analyze that kind of thing. And that's been a real help to me in ministry. That's not something that a lot of pastors have training in. it's just how to be able to tell what is this Excel spreadsheet telling me?
Yeah, I've had
Uh,
to learn that too. It's doesn't make sense sometimes. The
right.
parentheses or the this or that. Yeah.
Just the terminology, then things. So just that's been very helpful to me. Another thing that's been helpful to me is just kind of knowing how to be organized and how to do self management to make sure that my time is
Mm.
used well. I think the business background sort of helped train me to think strategically about how I allocate my own time and what I give my time to that's most important.
Yeah, I
So
think that's awesome.
it's
Yeah,
been helpful.
understanding timing and work hours and what it
Yeah,
really takes. I don't think people, when you're in ministry all the time, you don't understand what it means to work a 50-hour week, right?
right.
And how to schedule your time because you have a lot of quote unquote freedom. But if you don't use that freedom well, then when the hard times come up or the call comes in or the emergency comes in, you find yourself behind. And
Yes.
so it makes it difficult to catch up
Yeah,
in ministry, which causes burnout, which we'll get to later, and things like that as
right.
well. And you mentioned you were a church planter
Mhm,
for a while in Portland, Oregon.
mhm.
Then you came back to the Southern Baptist
Yeah.
area. That is, talk about a different culture shock. That had to be a culture shock because Portland, I've been to Portland many times, and that is not a Christian friendly Bible Belt sort of area.
No, it's not, and honestly, I was ill prepared for that. This was about the time when, Rick Warren started doing his, Purpose-Driven Church seminars in a big way, and I went to one of those, and it was incredibly inspiring, and so I was ready to, as they say, charge hell with a water pistol. I was all heat and no light.
Yeah.
And so, when we got to, Portland, Oregon, Susan and I did, to plant that church in a little community called Tualatin, which is on the periphery of Portland. We had lots of enthusiasm. I found out subsequently that I had very little skill and knowledge about what I was doing. So it was a tough education in church planting in an environment in a culture that was very different than the one I was from. What it did teach me is a couple of things that have been very important since then, and that is just the process, the logistics, the all the moving parts that are required to get a church planted, rooted, up and running, financed. How do you involve multiple partnering churches and partnering agencies like the local association, the denominational entity? How does all that fit together to help a planter do what God's called him to do? So the whole process of planting is probably the most important long-term thing I learned in Portland as a planter myself. I wasn't very good at planting, I w I but I sort of uh, morphed into that role of the guy who guides the process for some
Yeah.
other planters, and that kinda became the most important part of my ministry, both there as well as, later on here
Yeah,
in the
that's one of the
state.
skills I've gotten to see you use the most is through church planting. Through, if our audience doesn't know, Fellowship Church was a church plant
Right,
through
right,
BBA way back in the day, and
right. Long before I was here.
yeah, before you were there, before I was here
Yeah,
as well with Marty Mosier back
yeah,
in the day, and I came in, during that process right after Jonathan Leftwich took over, and they're very different personalities than I am. I'm not made out to be a church planter.
right,
I just don't have that personality that Marty Mosier has, where he could be friends with that music stand right there, and they would start talking back to him, and
right.
he'd have it getting baptized the next day. Some people have that gift. Chad Barrett, who was with us for a while, has that gift of
Mhm,
evangelism, where I'm just a Bible. I'm a teacher, or that's just the
right,
gifting God's given me, whether it was algebra, football, or the Bible was that way. So
right,
I noticed those different gifts, but I've gotten to see you with Hope Church and Foundation and many other churches really step in and help handle issues, help handle challenges, spur them, encourage them, or also discourage them about doing these certain things. And so
yeah,
you have a lot of experience with churches in our area in Central Texas area.
right,
What are the biggest challenges that you see? Because you're sort of outside. I know that in our church, I'm blinded to thinking we're great.
right,
We do
right,
everything well
right.
because it's our idea. And so it's hard to sometimes self reflect. But what are some of the challenges you've seen in the local church that BBA can really pour into?
One of the greatest challenges in the church today is just discouragement on the part of pastors and church leaders. Burnout, discouragement, particularly pandemic and post-pandemic. Just dealing with stress and just the pressures and challenges of doing ministry in a culture that's becoming more and more secular,
Mhm.
and just the expectations that are placed on pastors today, and so just I guess the broad category there is discouragement among church leaders. Also, I would say it's almost a pandemic all its own. Churches losing sight of what their purpose is, what their mission is, why they exist, and that's closely related to what does it mean to look like a healthy church as opposed to a church that's unhealthy. So many churches become inwardly focused, lose their sense of mission,
Mhm.
lose their Great Commission energy and motivation. So that's a big problem. Declining and plateaued churches that really are just doing church, but aren't reaching anybody outside of their own.
Yeah. I wonder if some of that plateau does come from burnout and discouragement.
Yeah, I think the two are certainly related.
Mm.
And then related to both of those is a third problem that I see in the church today, and that is just dealing with conflict of all kinds. The pandemic didn't start that or cause it,
Right.
but the pandemic and then all of the political polarization in our culture, uh, racial tensions that flared up that again weren't caused by the George Floyd tragedy, but were certainly inflamed and I think
Mm.
accelerated to some extent. All of those things have found their way into the church in various ways that have caused a level of conflict that I haven't seen this level of conflict in that being as pervasive as it is. I've not seen it in my time in ministry.
Yeah, I heard a podcast recently where they were talking about how our culture has really moved into a negative mindset culture. We now have social media as such a tool and is so
Yes,
involved and ingrained in people's life. And you can create any account you want and you can be as rude to people as you want, where you would never be in a face to face thing and say
right.
something rude about them. But
Or
and
untrue.
not
You can say anything you want to that's
right.
true or untrue.
And if you
Yeah.
say it first, people are going to believe it. I talk to parents about this all the time, introducing their kids to things that they're going to face in the world. Be the first one to introduce them to, hey, warning them about the dangers of pornography. And so many parents, especially Christian homeschool parents,
Hmm.
want to shield their kids from that. But
Yeah.
if the first time they interacted is with a friend, then when you tell them that's wrong, you have to overcome the friend and the event.
Right.
Where if you're able to say, well, there's good pictures and there's bad pictures.
Right.
Even if it's a younger child, like these are bad pictures. Don't look at pictures where people don't have clothes on. You don't have to show them the pictures,
Right.
obviously, but just warning them, hey, these are good pictures, these are bad pictures. Beware of those things. And then the friend has to be the one overcoming the teaching of the parent
Right.
and the actual morality of whatever they're being asked to do. But because we're in such a negative culture, I think that does feed into conflict, which causes discouragement, which causes churches to really lament people leaving, people
Mhm.
moving, things
Mhm.
like that. So we can go back to that first challenge
Mhm.
of burnout. Do you think it's mostly relational burnout? Do you think it's mental like burnout, spiritual burnout? Like, what do you think some of those key components are to pastors just burning out?
I'm convinced that one of the key components is an unbiblical definition of what it means to be successful in ministry.
Amen to
Uh,
that.
um, who gets to do the conferences and the big podcasts and all of those things? Well, it's the people who are quote successful, meaning
Yeah.
their church is big or they've written a book that was a bestseller or whatever. All of those things are fine
Yeah.
in and of themselves. They don't make you a success in ministry. I'm convinced that biblically speaking, the only way to view being successful in carrying out your calling as a pastor or as a church leader is to be able to answer the question, are you being faithful to do what God has called you to do in a way that honors Him?
Mhm.
If you can answer yes to that question, then I think you are a success in ministry, and I think you will stand before the Lord one day and hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant," which is hopefully what we all want.
Mhm.
It has nothing whatsoever to do with the size of your ministry,
I agree 100%.
but we tend to measure everything by quantitative measurements rather than those qualitative measures. Am I honoring the Lord? Am I doing what the Lord's called me to do? So if your definition of success in ministry gets messed up and is is determined by worldly measures, then you're going to be responding and dealing with all of these pressures, and you're going to look, across the fence at the other guy's church, and his pasture looks greener than yours do. Now, in reality, it only looks greener because you're not as close to that one as you as
Yeah,
you are to this
exactly.
one. You get over there in the middle, you'll find out he's got plenty of problems too. But just the playing that comparison game, telling ourselves that if my church doesn't grow X amount this year, then I'm a failure, or sometimes church members feed our egos on these kind of things when everything's
Yeah.
going wonderfully and we're the new exciting church in town, and folks are saying wonderful things about you. Well, what if that goes a little bit sour? Does
Right.
that mean you're no longer a success in ministry? So grounding yourself in the right understanding of your calling and what it means to be a success in that calling biblically, and really making that the focus of your own soul's joy and happiness,
Yeah.
uh, is, I think, key. And I think it's where a lot of us in ministry go off the rails.
Yeah, I think the way you define success is so important,
Yeah.
right? Again, going back to the Great Commission and go make disciples of all nations, is your church discipling
Right.
people? Are you creating families that disciple kids and
Mhm.
that sort of nature? But it's hard to define those success. For example, deep relationships. How do you
Right.
quantitate deep
How do you
relationships? Or
measure that?
how do
Yeah.
you measure wisdom?
Mhm.
While these people are growing in wisdom. Well, but you can look at the bank statements, you can look at the number of people, and so many times people get caught up in that, and so many
Right.
times that pastors do. They get caught up in thinking, "Well, I'm really successful because look how many people come here." And
Right.
first of all, it tells me that number one, we have a pride issue, right? We have something inside of us that we're seeking that sort of validation on our calling, where that's a worldly validation that the Lord's already validated us. He's
Right.
given His Holy Spirit to listen to those things as well. But also, you don't have someone in your life who's holding you accountable.
True.
You don't have someone in your life that's going, "Hey, I noticed that you're saying a lot of I, and you're doing a lot of things that make you look really smart and everybody else look really bad. Like,
Right.
what's up with that? What's
Right.
going on there?" And you got to have those people, hopefully on your staff or at least in your life, that are going to call you out and say, "It's not about you.
Right.
So you're
Absolutely.
making it about you." And so many churches, I think, get caught up in and pastors, you can see it really easily because people want, "Good job. Like, I really enjoyed your sermon."
Right.
And you don't want to, well, dismiss it because it's nice that they're trying to say something nice and encourage you,
Right.
but also you can't let it go to your head because one week you have a bad offering and you're like, oh no, this, or one week people are on vacation and there's not as many people. Do you preach as challenging a sermon when there's less people there? I remember
Right.
we had church during snowpocalypse, which is probably a bad idea, but we had 3 services still, and we had our last service had 2 people in it. And we did the same worship set. I did the same sermon.
Yeah.
I was like, these 2, because those 2 people were serving some kids during the second service.
Right.
Like, they were serving. We're going all out. And so we just worship the Lord. It didn't matter how many people showed up.
Right.
We're
Right.
gonna worship the Lord the same because it's not about how many people show up. It's about honoring the Lord with the gifts He's given you, like you were saying.
Right.
But we don't sometimes. We
We
get
don't, and I encourage, through our coaching ministries in the association, through our consultations, through various ways, we try to encourage guys to root themselves, ground themselves in the right definition. First of all, the right understanding of their calling. What does it mean to be called, and what does God expect me to do? And then what does it mean to be a success at that, which I think equates to faithfulness. At the same time, I tell them, listen, that doesn't mean we don't measure things. We don't we measure fruitfulness, right? We
Mhm.
want to see how we're doing, but how we're doing at any given moment in all of those quantitative measures, that doesn't make you a success or a failure.
Mhm.
God's determination, God's judgment
Yeah.
makes you a success or a failure, and God judges on faithfulness and
Mhm.
and heart, right? He sees the
Right.
heart, not the outward appearance. So God's not impressed with how many people are in your congregation on Sunday.
Right.
God's impressed with what's going on in your soul,
Mhm.
and that is both wonderfully freeing, liberating, but also incredibly convicting
Mhm.
because we so often, even in the ministry, operate on outward appearance.
Yeah.
So I think that's very closely connected to the almost epidemic level of discouragement and burnout among ministry leaders.
Yeah, and I know from my personal story, took God 27 years to get some of that out of me
Mm.
before I could be a lead pastor.
Yeah, it took me being a horrible church planner to realize that I wasn't the next big thing, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, and it's very humbling,
Yeah, very.
and having people leave that you love, and they leave, and you have to be like, "This is about the Lord,
Right.
not about what I want," and those sort of things. So, how do you help pastors that are struggling with that burnout, relationally, mentally? You mentioned coaching is one of the ways that you do that.
Yeah.
Are there other ways that you help them get through that burnout and discouragement?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important that people in ministry leadership be connected with peers, have some kind of a peer network. And I don't mean dozens and dozens necessarily, but a few close brothers or sisters who serve in ministry leadership because they get what you're going through, but they can also ask you the tough questions because
Mhm.
they know themselves. And so there's a mutual learning, but mutual accountability. One of the most dangerous things people can do in ministry is isolate themselves. And so it's helping through the association, we hope to create not just a fellowship among churches and church leaders, but some of those crucial peer-to-peer relationships. And so we try to foster those.
Yeah.
Another way is, and this is a kind of a drum I've been beating for a while, a few churches are beginning to get on board, and that is churches to be proactive about having sabbatical policies for their ministry leaders, for pastors and ministerial staff members. Not as a crisis intervention tool, but as something that is a regularly planned extended break away from ministry responsibilities for refreshment, renewal of body, soul, mind,
Mhm.
fresh learning, an opportunity to learn something without having the weekly pressures of ministry, and then to be able to come back refreshed, equipped, and ready to
Mm.
re-engage into that ministry. I try to get churches to understand this isn't just something you do for your pastor.
Right.
This is something you do for yourself, for your church. Because if you can help your pastor have a long and healthy tenure at your
Yeah.
church, you have a much better chance of being a healthy, impactful church. So don't think about it as some gift you're giving to your pastor. It is that, but think about it as something good you're doing for your church's health. So I've been preaching the sabbatical thing for a while. A few are beginning to catch on.
Yeah, and BBA has put that into practice with Oasis Retreat, one of the things
Yeah,
that BBA offers, and not just to lead pastors, to support staff. And I know that man, as soon as that email comes out, I'm telling my guys, hey guys, Oasis is coming up. You guys need to take advantage of
yeah,
this opportunity to get away. And we do have a sabbatical policy that Jonathan Leftwich put in place that we still continue to this day. And it is vital to
yeah,
have that time of
absolutely.
rest and stepping away and refocus and just reconnecting with the Lord because um, wise man told me there's always another Sunday.
Indeed.
You get done with the service, we preach 3 every Sunday, but as soon as I get done, I'm thinking, "Oh, wait, what am I gonna say next week that connects to this week?" And I'm 30 minutes outside of preaching 3 services, and there's another thought about
Yeah,
what am I gonna say next week, and
yeah,
so
it's relentless.
it can feel like pressure or it can feel like an opportunity.
Right.
I try to really encourage people in discipleship to think, well, this you have an opportunity
Mhm.
to pour, not a responsibility to that the
Yeah.
Lord's got the responsibility, your job is to be faithful in that, and
Yeah,
so
it's
you
not
mentioned
something you have to do, it's something you get to do.
yeah, and you mentioned that churches have kind of lost focus of their mission.
Yeah, yeah.
And so can you elaborate on that or without using church names or maybe some
Yeah.
examples of that?
Yeah. Um, One of the reasons we invest as associations so heavily in church planting is because churches that are newer, and I mean that are uh, under 15 years old, that's a broad category, but say under 15 years old, tend to reach people outside the church more effectively. They tend to baptize more new believers per capita, meaning for every 100 church members, they tend to baptize more new converts than say older churches, longer established churches do. And all of that points to the fact that over time, churches tend to lose focus about their mission. Their vision, which started was very outward oriented, tends to turn back around and start to focus inward. And they become about, okay, how are we going to pay for our stuff we like to do at church, and
Mhm.
how are we going to organize and plan and program for the things that service our church members and keep us happy, and how, so instead of church planting, they become about you know, potlucks
Yeah,
instead.
building a bigger building and then having to
Yeah,
pay for that
yeah,
building.
and more services to keep church members happy and keep them in the seats and keep them giving and all those sorts of things. I'm not saying all those things are bad in and of themselves. I'm just saying that overall, churches over time, unless they are intentional about not doing this, will lose their outward focus. They'll lose their sense of mission, and it will become more about maintaining the church organization.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean, that in a nutshell, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about lack of church health.
Yeah.
Is more about, hey, what about us? It's more looking in the mirror than looking out the window at
Yeah.
the lost world. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can see that happening as churches grow, we grow. It's when we don't have any more room, so we got to be ready to church plant. We got to be ready to send out
Right.
more, and we have a lot of exciting church plants that's coming in our area here very soon. Talked to Dakota yesterday. They're planting a quarter mile away from us in the golf course.
Yep.
The Mockingbird Room, I think that's
Mhm.
there, and they had their interest meeting this last week, and great church and
Yeah.
great family that's starting that, and Brandon George starting in Buda, and Josh Clark starting in Buda, and I
Right.
think there's even one starting in Negley Elementary School, another quarter mile away from us, and so it's like, how do we as a bigger church encourage those guys,
Yeah.
pour into them, spur people on because we need more healthy churches, and we have so many people coming. It is hard to. I remember a couple years ago when it was Resurrection Sunday, thinking, I don't know if I even want to put out information on our service because I don't know where we're going to put everybody
Right.
in there, right? And then that was a really um, stark thought for me. Like, why are you not wanting to reach out to people to hear the gospel message? And it's like, well, you're getting inward focus, and you got to remember to stay outward focus and be out in the community doing things, encouraging people, and walking through life
Right.
with people in all those arenas. And yeah, it can be a big challenge.
An unhealthy church sees all those new church plants coming in around you and thinks, "Oh, competition.
Yeah,
We might lose some of our church members, etc."
yeah,
A healthy church thinks, "That's awesome.
yeah.
It's not like we're running out of lost people
I
here in
know.
Kyle, all right? So we need more people who are out there reaching people that need to know Jesus. And if that means God calls somebody from our church to be a part of one of those, then
Yeah,
we chalk that up as a win, not a loss.
yeah.
We get to send them out as missionaries. So that's part of the attitude that distinguishes between healthy and unhealthy churches.
Yeah, we're excited having Brandon come back, and Brandon and Becky, who are
Right?
dear to our heart. He was a youth, accepted the Lord as
Mhm.
a freshman, and walked through all those things, and was a missionary in Romania, worked here, then went with Jonathan to plant in Rockport, now coming back. And so it's exciting to see
Yeah.
those sort of things. But yeah, I can see a lot of churches get very competitive in that arena, and being outward focused is. I mean, if you walk or drive and look around our area, there's a lot of people who need the love of Jesus and
Amen.
need to find that. And yeah, we've got to be a part of it. And then you mentioned the third challenge in there, and I think you wrote it down, dealing with conflict.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what sort of tips would you give to church members or church leadership in handling conflict within the church setting?
Well, to pastors, I would say there's almost no scenario in which you can win if you are fighting your own battles all by yourself. So whether it's a group of elders or a group of deacons or someone, somebody hopefully has the pastor's back. And if someone and this is a common conflict scenario is someone is attacking the pastor, verbally on social media or whatever, and saying, making wild accusations, saying things that are untrue, but maybe they have some influence, and so people start, it starts a little rumor thing going on, or what, it just becomes a real a pain, an antagonist toward the pastor.
Mhm.
It's almost impossible. There's almost no scenario in which a pastor can successfully defend himself, because you look like you're just sort of feathering your own nest,
Mhm.
and B, you've got to be pastor to everyone. You can't focus on this one person that's attacking you. And so having a group within your church's polity that can address those kind of antagonists, those kind of attacks against church leadership is extremely important,
Mhm.
very important. Pastor, don't try to fight that battle on your own. Hand it off to some men you trust, and they let them deal with
And
it.
especially don't try to fight it online.
No,
I mean,
don't reply to Facebook posts and emails, and
Yeah.
don't get caught up in that.
I've just learned that for me personally, I don't get on social media. I don't post on social media. I avoid the medium as
Mhm.
much as I can because
Right.
the enemy just uses it to fuel grudges and to fuel things that I don't need to be thinking about. I
Right.
mean, I've got plenty to think about with the what how God wants me to share the word and how He wants me to encourage the people that are in our church and how to be praying and spend more time on my knees than I do on social media, because that sort of toxic surrounding fuels this desire to defend yourself,
Right.
which tends to make you cynical
And
and
then you start
distrusting.
losing your cool, and then you
Mm,
say something that's maybe a little inappropriate or that you shouldn't say. You've just given that antagonist more ammunition
yeah,
than to use against you. Look what the pastor told me. You look what the
yeah,
pastor said. So just stay out of that scenario.
yeah. And I think there's a big question to know how much should you even defend yourself
Yeah.
against things that are false or uninformed. So many times it's an uninformed opinion
Right.
on things, and
Right.
so I've had several times where I would love to just come meet with you face to face,
Yeah.
and we don't need a camera or recording.
Let's talk.
And well, you don't understand all the cases, and I'm not going to tell you
Right.
all the information about why this person was let go from our church or why this situation was dealt with the way that is. You don't need to know all the information. That's not a
Yeah. Church
position you need to
leaders
be
are
in.
isolated by the fact that they know things that they can't share.
Yeah.
And obviously you have to honor that. Yeah, certain things are to be kept confidential and aren't appropriate to share. So you can't give all of the information
Right. For
that
sure.
would maybe cast your situation in a little bit better light.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you can engage in conversation with someone who's not necessarily malicious or an antagonist, but just has a concern. Don't assume that everybody who has a concern or maybe even disagrees with you is after you or
Right.
attacking you. Have a conversation. Listen to their point of view, and then respond once you understand where they're really coming from.
Yeah. And a lot of times you'll find out that they're either misunderstanding something you said
Yeah,
or you said something wrong.
yeah,
Like you said it a way that didn't come across the way you thought it would come across. And that's
yeah.
where you humble yourself and
Absolutely.
apologize. But I think it's a hard thing for a pastor to understand the difference between like having thick skin and having a good soil as your heart.
Indeed.
It's really easy to have thick skin and just not entertain anything, but instead we need to have good soil and just take care. And when if the thing cares of the world trying to choke you out, like you trim,
Yeah.
right? You trim those things so you can be healthy and produce fruit and understanding that again, like you were mentioning earlier, faithfulness to the Lord is first priority. And then when you're faithful to the Lord, all the rest of it takes care of itself. When you're looking for the approval of man, those things can really hurt.
Right.
When people begin to question you or not like the way you said something or this decision, again, approval of man, I think, is one of those things that causes such discouragement in pastors today,
Indeed.
as well. What are some other conflicts that you see coming up in the church? Are there other conflicts between church members that you see a lot of, or I know you step in a lot of times when there's conflict between pastors.
Well, I step in sometime when there's conflict between a pastor and a staff member or something like that, but probably the most common type of conflict that we're called in to mediate or be a part of. And honestly, by the time we're a part of the conversation, it's typically too far gone. There's not going to be a wonderful result. Usually, the result is somebody's going to have to leave. But the type of conflict is um, a church member or a couple are unhappy with the pastor for whatever, or they're unhappy with the student pastor, or they're unhappy with someone in church leadership, and they say something, maybe on Facebook or whatever that's inappropriate. Well, then that starts a cycle. And then other people start commenting. And then pretty much pretty soon you have sides.
Right.
Are you on the pastor's side or are you on the side of, Joe and Judy church member?
Mhm.
And once there are sides like that and everybody's entrenched, it's almost impossible to have
Yeah.
a result in which everybody gets along again. Our role is typically to help church leadership figure out, okay, where do we draw the line? How do we what's the best process for us getting to an end of this? If and understanding that end is probably going to mean somebody's going to need to leave.
Right.
But what's the best process for doing that? What's the right way to make sure that everyone is heard appropriately, but that it doesn't turn into a free for all? So just kind of helping with the process, and then getting to a point of resolution, where resolution meaning not that everybody's happy and satisfied,
Right.
but that the church can at least move on.
Right.
That's usually how
Some
we're
sense of
involved.
peace,
Yeah.
and that's
So we're that third party who comes in, and we're not on a side.
you're mediating.
Now,
Right.
I'm on the church's side because I have a relationship with the church, and usually with those church leaders, and I love them, and I want to serve them, but I'm not a direct participant in one side or the other. And so a lot of times for us, it's just listening and saying, this is what I hear. Sometimes it's interviewing parties to the conflict, and then giving a report to the church leadership saying, best as I can tell, here's what's going on.
Right.
Here's my recommendation for how to move on or resolve this. So that's the kind of role we typically play. Very often, it is not. It's not the result that everybody wants, but it's the one that's realistic at that point.
Yeah, and hopefully the best case scenario
Yeah.
for those different situations.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about challenges
Mhm.
for the church. Do you have any advice as we get ready to close up? Any advice for churches that, pastors that are near burnout, or churches that struggle with knowing their vision and being outwardly focused, or they have a lot of conflict in their church? Do you have any advice to them about how to be healthy as a church? Things you've maybe learned from other churches that you're like, man, I've seen this work really well.
Mhm.
Hope. There's hope for us out there somewhere. What does that look like?
Yeah, to the pastor, or the individual church leader, I would say, one, don't isolate yourself. Make sure you've got some friends in ministry outside of your church. Talk to somebody. Go see a counselor. We've had very excellent results with some of our ministry leaders using the Oakwood Counseling Center and other Christian counselors, because they just need somebody to help them think through and process through some stuff they're dealing
Yeah.
with. So don't sit on it. Don't isolate yourself, and don't just think, well, if I just work harder, this will all get better.
Or think you're the only one going through these sort of
Yes.
things. All of us go through those
Absolutely.
sort of things.
Yeah. So do the things, be proactive about the things that will be healthy for you as a church leader. To churches, I would say, uh, most churches could benefit from some kind of a process that everyone from the church has the opportunity to be a part of, but that asks some strategic questions like, who are we? Who are we as a church? What's unique about us as a church? What are our values? What do we really care about? Where are we? What's going on in our mission field? Let's stop just driving to church a week and then driving home. Let's take a concentrated look at what's going on in our community, in our neighborhood, in our city, in our local mission field. Um, how are we doing? Let's be honest. Let's have some ugly truth sessions with how are we really doing as a church? What do the numbers say? What do we say individually in terms of how we're feeling about our church, and what we want to see happen with our church? Okay, understanding these things about ourselves and about our community, what do we want to do? How can our church really make a difference in this community? How can we connect with people that we're not connecting with, and build some bridges that we can take
But
the
that's
gospel
hard,
to?
because that means you have to get rid of some of the, sacred cows and some of the
Yeah,
things you've
yeah, that's
always
the next
done.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, how are we going to do it? All right,
Mm.
what are our implementation steps? And a lot of them begin with, what are we going to stop doing before we
Yeah.
start doing something else? And then finally, okay, what's our vision, at least in terms of our goals for the next 3 to 5 years, where we want to get to as a church? Over about a 6 to 9 month period of time, I've seen churches that were really stagnant, really unhealthy, through the leadership of their pastor and other key leaders, go through that process. And it's something that Dr. Minton uses in his coaching sessions with guys. It's something that we borrowed from Aubrey Malphurs from many years ago. It's not original or new or creative. It's just some basic questions that will help us reorient as a church away from the things that are keeping us unhealthy, toward the things that will be more about our biblical purpose as a church. So nearly every church could benefit by going through periodically, say every 5 years or so, going through some kind of evaluation a strategic planning process that uh, helps them face difficult things and helps them make hard decisions.
Yeah.
Because without doing that, all of the inertia is going to turn inward, and you're going to become a church that's about maintenance rather than mission.
Yeah, and we did that a few years ago, which is where we, came up with path groups and different
Hmm.
things. And I mean, I think that was one of the things that helped us really make the church something that we're focused on mission, not on people.
Right.
Right. When we looked around and was like, well, youth ministry is amazing and Jonathan's amazing, but it can't be built on us. It's got to be
Right.
built on a calling and a mission that's greater than we are.
Right.
So that this church is known in the community for loving God and transforming lives by following Jesus. And that's got to be something that we focus on in all areas.
Right.
That we can do a lot of things, but we have to say no to a lot of things that
Absolutely.
are good things, but so that we can focus on the best thing, which is making disciples, helping parents make disciples of their children, helping the youth to be that next generation to make disciples,
Right.
and permeate it all the way through our community as well. So thank you so much
Hey,
for being here
thanks
and
for letting
talking
me
with us.
share.
Can I pray for you and
Please.
Susan and just BBA before we go?
Thank you.
Lord, I thank you so much for Robby and Susan and just their heart for serving the churches in our Central Texas area. And Lord, just the way that they've committed themselves, Lord, to loving on pastors and you stepping into hard things to help people get through conflict and to be encouraged again and to find their calling, Lord, and what you want them to do and how to be faithful in that. And so thank you for them. I thank you for the Bluebonnet Baptist Association and all they do to support pastors, the way they support our church and our pastors as well. And so thank you for all they do. And I pray for just a blessing over them. Help them to continue to serve churches well and to spur people on. And Lord, we need a revival in our community. And it comes from new church plants. So many exciting new church plants coming
Mm.
into our area and all of Central Texas. So I just pray for Robby and his team as they oversee them, spur them on, make hard decisions for them sometimes, tell them no in some areas sometimes. I pray that you'll give Robby the boldness and the encouragement to do his job well. And Lord, we thank you for your son, Jesus Christ, in whom we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks,
Thank you,
Pastor.
Robby.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.
All right, man.